Welcome back to The Doctors Are In. This is our last episode of this season. I'm Reverend Dr. Katie Nix and Reverend Dr. Phil Blackwell with me as well. And leading up to this episode, I know we've talked a lot about the logistics, the behind the scenes of the merger, the first 6 months, all of these pieces, but we wanted to end this series talking about a little of what comes next, right? How many times in the, Disney movies, they lived happily ever after, but I want to know what happens to Prince Charming and Cinderella after, the main event. So what we're going to do for this episode is going to be a little bit different, and I'm really excited about it. We've invited Amanda and Samantha, who are both great people, great moms, just wonderful all around, to talk about what was it like coming in after the merger, because both of you, and you as well, were here after the dust settled, or maybe there's still dust in the air, but just kind of talking about after all of this work we've done and we've talked about in the previous episodes, what happens now? What came afterwards? And I want to start with Amanda's story because it is hilarious, the irony of how all of that came to be. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Yes. So why don't you start? How did you end up here?
We bought a house in the fall of 2020 right across the street from university. And the pandemic was in full swing, and so no churches in the area were meeting in person. And I fully intended to start kind of church shopping and find something in the neighborhood once places started gathering again, but there just weren't really any options anywhere near our house. But university had this great little playground. For the nursery school there. And so my kids were taking full advantage of that. And one Sunday morning, we're over there playing on the playground, and all of a sudden cars just start rolling in. And I was like, oh, I guess we're back to church. So I'm kind of like ushering my kids like, okay, we probably need to go. They're actually using the building now. Brad Hershey, many people listening might probably know who he is, was one of the folks coming up, and he stopped to introduce himself because that is what Brad Hershey does. Mm-hmm. And we started chatting, and he was like, oh, you're welcome to stay and let the kids play, and you're not bothering anybody. It's perfectly fine. And if you want to come inside and join us some Sunday, that would be lovely too. And I said, oh, that would be really nice. We're looking for a church once things get going. And he goes, well, we're closing.
Welcome, surprise. Yes.
I was like, what? So yeah, church started meeting again at the university building for about, 5 or 6 Sundays. And then the merger with Grace was happening. So we did actually join in at university for a couple of services, including the final one where they did like the decommissioning of the building, which was really interesting because I'd never been part of anything like that, or really knew what the process was for doing that. And hearing all those folks who attended share their stories about what Grace meant to them and so many memories. They took us on a tour of the building, and they talked about the youth groups and the potlucks and and all those kinds of things. And it was really neat to kind of get a taste of what people were losing, as we're moving on. And then, just those memories and those things that people were attached to. But I wasn't part of that.
To begin at the end is your experience with University Church.
So then once the church was no longer meeting in that building and people had moved over to Grace, we started attending Grace. And I had fully intended to do a lot of church shopping. I had a whole list of churches in the area that I wanted to visit. And I had even, I told my husband, because at the time we had 3 kids, we now have 4, but at the time we had 3. And, it's really hard visiting a new church with young kids when you've never been in the building and you don't know where the bathrooms are and you don't know where to take a kid who's having a meltdown, or if there's Sunday school or a nursery. And then COVID too, as churches were starting to meet in person, we were still wearing masks, we were still distancing. Yes. Some places you could only sit every other pew, or some churches were doing part of their service outside. So it was like, all these other things were happening. And that kind of made it difficult to shop. And so, yeah, I told my husband, like, I'm going to need some Sundays to like just go by myself and check things out before I start bringing the kids with me. And I brought him to Grace, and then it was like, I just wanted to keep coming back to Grace. Like the next Sunday, it was like, well, I could go, or we could just go to Grace. Like, it was just so easy to fit in, and it felt like home right away.
Ooh, that's really good. Okay, we're going to get more into that. I like it. So how did you end up here
Here.
at Grace? Yes.
Somewhat similar story. So we lived in the Northampton neighborhood for years and years, and we were living in a very little house and had intended to move. We outgrew it when our first daughter was born. We outgrew it again when our second daughter was born, and then the pandemic hit, and we are 4 people living, working,
In very
schooling,
close quarters,
in very, very
yes.
close quarters. So it was like, we have to move. And so we ended up, after a long search, moving into the neighborhood here in Westminster, so just a few blocks away. And, you know, it was fall 2021, I think, that we moved into the neighborhood. So probably after the pandemic wrapped up more or started to, you know, die down finally. And things were, you know, a little more settled for us. We decided, or I decided, that we're going to find a church. And Grace was the one that was really close to us. I couldn't hardly go anywhere out of my house without passing by. And the sign in the front, which is often going viral, caught my attention. Yeah. And there were some other, banners and things that made it very clear that this is an inclusive environment, and some of the other things that I struggle with other denominations maybe that I've been, a part of in the past, because we have LGBTQ family that I don't want, my kids hearing, necessarily certain other messages about.
Yeah.
So I thought this will be a safe space where I don't have to, worry about what, my kids are hearing or something, so we can give this a try. We came and, like you said, it just felt right, and we never really shopped around too much more. So,
You know what I like to say? I'm like holy sticky fly paper, right? They just come and they're stuck.
Well, that's one example. Not,
Yes.
if you want to, this is a digression, but if you want to know, it was a communion that got me hooked.
Really?
Yeah, because I grew up, my parents had different denominations. So my dad was Pentecostal, my mom was Catholic.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah, so you couldn't get too far apart than that. So I ended up going to Catholic schools, but my dad didn't want me to involve in the communion process because he didn't want a child doing that. So there was a lot of weirdness for me growing up about not being able to take communion. And so when you guys had the communion, I grabbed my kids. I was like, we're staying in the pew. We don't know what the rules are, so don't run up there. We're going to stay here. And so everyone else went up for the communion, and you gave this very nice message about how it's inclusive. This is God's table. We don't deny people access. And I was like, well, there's still probably some
unspoken,
catches
right?
and caveats. So I told him, stay here. And Maya, my daughter, was actually playing in the children's area. And when everything was done, you had noticed they didn't take the communion because I had told them not to. And so you came down with the communion and tried to give it to Maya. And Maya's like, no, my mom. And you're like,
You will take Jesus.
And so I was like,
you are loved and you're going to accept it.
yeah, this is it. Okay, she walked down from the altar and shoved communion into my kids' mouth. And I'm here for it. That is what I'm doing.
You got the conversion, right? That counts.
It was a really profound, I think I was crying in a pew and you didn't notice. So it was really beautiful for me.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm tearing up just, talking about it. But that's the story of okay, here we are. This is it.
This is home now, yeah.
There's an emerging children's ministry thanks to the 3 of you, right? I mean, it's your children
Go
plus,
team
plus,
mom.
plus.
Yes.
But I'm guessing that most churches don't have as many kids in the worship service or a play area or a children's time that goes so well? I mean,
It goes so well depending on who's doing it.
no, well, that's exactly the point I'm making. I mean, Kate does a marvelous job of talking with the kids. Not all of us can do that, and ought not to try. But there's a kind of inclusion of the kids that I think speaks its own sermon.
Yeah.
And then again, Amanda, with your daughter dancing to the music and other things.
Oh, yes, we have our liturgical dancer that's always available. And I think there's something there. Part of when we talk about this merger, it wasn't just a merger of two buildings, two histories and things like that. It was also a merger of two different, not different personalities, but two distinct family groups. And I think university really brought over that openness to saying, you know what, you are safe here, you are welcomed here, and we care more about that than we do of, are you sitting in the pews? Are you allowed to have the communion? And so that infused, so that infused into what Grace was hoping to do as well. And this kind of leads into the question. It's one thing to say, like, okay, we came, we decided this is it. What for you stuck out? What made you go, okay, this is gonna feel like home for us? Like, what was it that really hit home for you? And then I'd also follow up with, like, did at any point you go, oh my gosh, this church just went through a massive fill in the blank, they just had a huge merger or they just had this big transition. Like, did any of those red flags come up for you as well? So what made you go, hey, this is feeling really comfortable? And did you notice anything that made you go, wait a minute? And you can be honest.
I thought really hard about that question, especially the red flags part, because I can't really think of any.
Hey, we did well. No red flags.
But I will say this too. I think in a way, well, one beautiful thing about coming in after the merger, as the merger is happening or whatever, is you have all this ignorance. We don't know, are there like cliques here? Are there, and I felt like as a new person, I didn't know who was university. I didn't know who was Grace. And I think a lot of people didn't know who I was, and they could just assume if they're Grace, they just could assume I was a university person. And if they were university people, they could assume I was a Grace person. So I'm not, was there like Team Grace, I don't know, if that was happening, but I wasn't part of it. I felt on the outside of any of that. If that happened, I don't know. And I also think that the merger happening as COVID was going, there's so many things. Like, was this a problem because of COVID that shook everything up and halted ministries and changed the way events had to be held and things like that? You can kind of blame COVID, or do you blame the merger? Like, I don't think you can really tease those things apart very well, which could be a blessing in some ways,
Yeah,
too.
no, I always like saying, like, while we're telling this story of this merger, like, every story has so many layers and dynamics and stuff. And so while we are hopeful that other churches going through these kinds of conversations, like, take what you can, but also know, like, for good or for bad, this is the reality we were working with. And I love to joke because when people first started visiting after the merger, they'd be like, well, I know this is a church, so whose pew is this, right? Everyone's got their seat. And I was like, honey, no one's been here for 3 years. Sit anywhere. You can have my seat up front for all I care, right? Like, and that's just, there was some gift in that, and also made it really hard because we came back and I didn't see anybody's face. And how do you build those relationships like that?
Very early on, you asked me to do a Bible study on Sunday morning, 9:30.
Well, isn't that smart of me?
Well, it was probably wonderful, but also 9:30 is not a great time to do that sort of thing, but that's a different discussion. I asked the people who had gathered, how many of you came from University Church? 7 raised their hands. How many of you came from Grace Church? 7 raised their hand. That left 6 others who were new. And this was within 2 or 3 years after the merger, which says, okay, now what? What can we imagine going forward? Because you are experiencing a different congregation than the previous members did.
Yeah.
They bring all sorts of wonderful thoughts, gifts, memories, and visions. But what do you see? What could you imagine this church being in the next 5 years that would really matter to you and your families?
Ooh, I like that. So for me, the question is something about Grace felt comfortable to you. So, what was that, and how do we build on that moving forward, right? Because you both come in without either of the histories,
Right.
but now are like, no, this is my church. So, in some ways, you are helping the voice of, okay, and what comes next, right? Because, yes, the merger was big, but that was a chapter in the story, and it's now time to write the next chapter. So, what does the next chapter look like for you based on coming in after all of this?
So we were talking about the children's ministry, and that is a big, I didn't realize how important that was until I landed here, and it kind of worked out. Because I have attempted to engage with churches in the past at different points in time, and it becomes a nightmare when the kids don't want to go to church.
Yeah.
It is an absolute nightmare of a Sunday morning, dragging everyone out of the house,
yes.
yelling, like bribing, like trying to get them to go.
I've done it all, yeah. Because you know what? Like it or not, mommy works here. We're going. Yeah. And I will say, just because I know sometimes when people say children's ministry, the image you get in your head is this is a church that has 50 kids and their own wing. We are not that size. No. And I think that's important to claim, like, we can do this. Our confirmation class is 5.
It's not so much even like formal children's ministry, but something working for the kids and connecting with the
There's
kids.
an openness to saying you're part of this family too.
Right.
That it's so easy.
It flipped in our family from being like, get out the door, get dressed, go, to kids saying, oh, we will go to church.
If we don't get there in time, someone else is going to acolyte, and it's my turn with the fire.
We need to get there early. We need to do this.
How many times has your daughter done the call to worship, or yours? My favorite is, how old is Betty?
5.
5, right? We've started this for a year now, where every morning she's the one who comes up to say, good morning, church, and she just starts church off, and they cheer for her, which that's 99% of why I became a pastor, because I was going to be on Broadway and I didn't have the chops, but now I have an audience that watches me every week, right?
So like you were saying, it's not the size, it's a comfortable size. There are other kids, but I think what works really well for my kids is the flexibility of, finding ways to engage. And it's not terribly rigid, so they can come and they can read sometimes, or they can interact however they want. My older daughter, of course I can brag. She's a really brilliant, gifted kid, which means she doesn't often get along easily with other kids her age. So she's really found her place, like volunteering in the nursery. She would really prefer
baking. Let me tell you, anytime she's like, do you need me to make a cake for that? I'm like, first of all, the answer is always yes. We need a cake.
Trying to get Eva into, doing something with other middle schoolers can sometimes be a challenge. If there would be like a retired ladies club, she would probably love to join that.
There we go, yeah.
Instead. But,
Intergenerational ministry.
Yeah, intergenerational Eva ministry. But, she does her thing with the confirmation class, and then she goes and plays with babies, and she's been allowed to do it. So that's great for her. And she's really one that goes from, being hesitant to go to church to being the one who's like, Mom, I know you don't feel like it, but we are going. I'm going now. Come on, get your stuff. Let's go.
It just makes it so much easier, right? Because we have to fight everything else. Because I'm like, no. The state of Missouri says you have to go to school. I don't care if you want to or not. Your butt's going to school. They have one place it's not a fight. Is really nice.
Lovely. And it's because nobody's trying to force her into something, that doesn't fit for her.
Yes. Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Speaking of that growth and having a formal and an informal children's ministry, which I think we're getting to having both. Last summer, there was no Sunday school in the summertime, and I kind of wasn't sure what we were doing this summer. And in the summer, it was way more of a struggle to get my kids to go to church, knowing that they want to come for Sunday school. They like seeing their friends. They like all, and like just coming. It's like, you still get to go to children's church. You will still see all the same kids. It's not the same thing. They'd rather be here for an hour longer if they get to go to Sunday school too. And my kids even like to stay for the potlucks. I mean, they always
love the
ask,
potlucks.
when is there a potluck this? I'm like, you are the pickiest eaters on earth, and you won't touch any of that food that, like, you don't know what's in it for sure. And yet you still, like, they like being here. They really like being here.
Easiest tip, I think, for a church wanting to like accommodate families. When you have a potluck, I try to make a special family lane. So you've got all of the dishes over there that you know the kids aren't going to, and then I have a separate table where you have the Uncrustable PBJs, the baby carrots, the juice boxes. Grab and go. And then they go straight to the dessert line, which is fine, but like we attempted a vegetable, right? But like that awareness of like when we talk about accessibility, there's so many layers to that. And for me, I know the merger went well because so many different ages and abilities and stories feel comfortable and safe in the place, right? And I'm like, that for me is, and maybe this has been the same in your ministry, like if you can hit that in a ministry, everything else is like, they're not going to hear the sermon until they feel safe. They're not going to care about X, Y, and Z, baptisms, giving, all that, until they know, hey, I belong here.
I'm going to ask a question of the two of you that's not related to your children.
Okay.
Wait, what? We have a life outside our children?
I don't remember.
I don't know what that's like.
I mean, this is a very important point that you have been making that is absolutely true about the comfort level that families seem to have, or some families seem to have. So what does each of you need as an adult out of the ministry or experience or worship of this church that you can imagine taking advantage of because the kids are doing okay?
Oh, I like
What
that.
do you need to do okay?
That's beautiful. I want to answer that one.
Go for it.
Now, I have too many things I want to say about it too. As an adult, one thing that in my church shopping that I wanted to make sure of as well, my husband is not a churchgoer, as I think you all know. And he came faithfully to Grace every Sunday for a year when our youngest was born, because I could not handle a nursing baby and manage 3 other kids that are running wild, and that Pastor Katie just allows to run wild and encourages.
I love it. I love it.
So my husband came, faithfully for like every Sunday for like a whole year. And then as soon as, I was able to manage, he ducked back out again. But I wanted a place, even though my husband's not a churchgoer, there are times if your kids are involved in things, if your family, if you're doing, there are times where the whole family needs to be at church, and I'm talking about the kids again, but maybe the kids are in choir or they're singing or they're performing, or maybe, maybe Pastor Katie asks you to speak at something, and you want your spouse there, you want your partner with you, holidays, things like that. And I got tired of dragging him somewhere that I knew he wasn't comfortable, that no one else was very comfortable having him there. And that is not something he's ever experienced here at Grace. He has friends here. People.
Am I one of those? I'm gonna claim that. I'm gonna call that one. I'll be a friend too.
He has people that he seeks out to talk to when he does come, or when he attends like a church-related sort of thing.
Because there's food.
And no one's bothering him about his. It's not a like a time to try and sell it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which I feel like a lot of. That's what happens. Like, well, you're here now, so
there isn't that layer of desperation of, oh my God, you have small people, I will now. Like,
we're gonna save your soul today, right now.
Oh yeah.
Like that's not appealing to anybody. No. And that just makes people dig in their heels, And I don't find that at Grace. You can really you can be who you are, and you can be all in on, being Methodist, being a member of Grace. Like even when the church directory thing came out, and it was like, you don't have to be a member to be in the church directory. If you just like what's going on here and you want to be involved and you want to be, you want to be informed, like then get in the church directory so that we can find you.
More importantly, if you want the pastor to know your name, I'm gonna need a picture because we're getting big enough. I don't know
There
who all you
isn't this like strict, members get to do these things and non-members, are like second class. That's not, I don't think that that's a thing here. And I just really appreciate that.
Samantha.
This is an interesting question. I mean, just as an adult, what do I appreciate about it is I think the services are really beautiful. I really enjoy the music. It's a real treat to be able to hear the organ and all of that, and to have the kids, busy and happy, and then I can just kind of sit, relax, and hear the beautiful music. I'm I can't sing, but I'll sit in the pew and I will love somebody else.
Take
and,
it all in.
Yeah, and occasionally somebody who's a really good singer will sit behind me and I can pretend.
Oh, I love those. Yes.
So that's really lovely, and the choir. So that's beautiful. And I don't know, maybe, I haven't explored it much, but possibilities of involvement beyond just the church service, as far as like getting involved, service opportunities in the neighborhood, or groups that are more like study oriented. That appeals to me in some way, more like.
I wish Pastor Phil would do more 9:30 Bible classes because I really enjoyed his.
Did you pay her to say that?
Not much.
Because now we've got video recording of.
Well, I think of, how do we learn things outside of Sunday morning worship, or watching young kids to see if they're behaving more or less. And I mentioned earlier that 9:30 on a Sunday morning has a limited appeal because the choir people can't come to it. Parents are trying to do something with their kids. How might the church have other kinds of support groups, education groups, musical and artistic groups that's not Sunday morning? Now, there's no great revelation in that, but to have those discussions might be good, again, led by newcomers who say, well, I mean,
It's a yes and kind of a thing.
our trumpet player for Sunday, last Sunday,
Oh yeah.
I sat behind him at worship and I thanked him for his playing the trumpet. And I mentioned to him, inconsequentially as it turned out, I used to play the trombone. But I can't find my lip anymore. It's in storage somewhere. But then I thought, okay, then it's not me and him, but could he help lead a music group? And then there was a recorder group practicing the other day. And say, okay, what could we end up doing that we're not now doing that would be creative? What are your interests? What do you want to do?
I went to a church once and it was really, really large. And because it was so big, overwhelmingly big, one thing that they pushed a lot was community groups. And I think that's something I've heard of a lot of churches doing. So I don't know if that is something that you guys have ever considered. I think this church is a much more manageable size and it feels more comfortable to go in and maybe start knowing people. That church, it was like an auditorium. It was huge.
Yeah.
But they had kind of like a neighborhood focus for the community groups, where it was like trying to get you in community with people in your immediate vicinity, which was kind of cool and interesting in a way. We hung on with that for as long as we could until we had kids, and it became really difficult because there was a no kids group, and so getting a babysitter once a week was just intractable. So yeah, it was intractable. But
There's so many things in my life before kids that were a lot easier, right?
but it was nice to have some incentive to get to know and be actually really close with a handful of people, and that they were within like walking distance of your house. That was kind of lovely.
Yeah. And I really like, not only did you guys join the church, but you're both in proximity that you could walk to church, ride
Yes,
your bikes to
we
church.
walk to
like
church.
An awareness of this is, sometimes I think, well, the whole heart of the merger is, can we do this better together? And what do we have uniquely that we can live into in a way that other churches could not? And part of that was a deep affinity for the neighborhood. I mean, the fact that you can buy a house and just walk over to a playground, next thing you know, you're involved in a church, or you walk down the street and you're like, well, I guess I'm going here now. So part of that, and to say, like, who are we, knowing there may be hundreds of things we could do well, and saying, but what is unique to Grace? And the music piece, that space that is safe and welcoming and going, we are not here to convert you. We're not here to grab all your money, though you can always make a donation to the great work that God is doing at Grace United Methodist Church. Got my tagline ready. But that there's not this, I need something from you, but more of like, you will make our family better by being here.
And that feeds into it as well, because when you feel that way, when you feel cared for, you want to contribute. It's a more natural engagement than it's something where the pastor is up there saying, you better do this, you know.
Yeah, don't preach with the you better do this. It doesn't.
I've
yeah.
heard it before. There goes,
Oh, yeah.
There goes the next one. Yeah, long view, since I only have a long view these days, churches have location, space, time, and people to offer in ministry. And this location has its real strengths and a few weaknesses.
No parking lot can be a weakness. Yeah.
You know, it matters that you're on this corner. And it matters that there's so much room in the building that you have different groups coming in, and the more groups you can have come in, the more valuable is the ministry of the church, even if they don't show up on Sunday. And then time, it can be open at any time, day or night. And then people, who's interested in working with this group, that project? I mean, one of the things I noticed, having been a campus minister for 6 years, is that occasionally we have
And don't
students.
say just any campus minister. Where were you campus minister?
Well, the University of Chicago.
There we go. Let's shout out to what it is.
It's the Washington University of Chicago.
Yeah.
So I notice while you're preaching, I look around and I see occasionally a student or two sitting there. And I know that's not a future for the ministry of the church in the sense they're not going to stay, but they're there for a Sunday or for 6 weeks or something. How do we reach out to that group? What do they need? We don't assume we know. And you know, I go and talk to a couple of the students after service or something.
That's probably why they don't come back.
No, that's exactly right. But I'm just aware that we have people who come in the church on a Sunday morning who it's their first Sunday, or they're sitting in the back row, or back row's already taken. But
Yeah, we're Methodists. The back 3 rows are filled, and the front third is empty as can be.
so part of it is with new eyes, you know, what can we see that we did not see 10 years ago? And given COVID and all those things, what can we do and not do now that was not a question 10 years ago? So what should we be doing?
You know, I don't know, but I went to a Methodist university that had a church on campus that sort of, I don't know, they were kind of connected in some different ways. But I remember if you went to church ever, like they would spot college students, and the church was mostly, there were a few young families, but it was mostly little old ladies, and they would spot you, and they would get your information, they'd get you signed up, and you got care packages as soon as finals week rolled around. Like there'd be a shoebox.
Yes. People say, what do you need for good ministry? Food.
Food, really.
It's food and you're good.
And it was always like it always felt very open and welcoming, and they just reveled in having the college students there. And like Pastor, like knowing they're not gonna, most of them anyway are not gonna be here after graduation, or maybe beyond a semester or two, But I think it's a really neat thing. I have so many fond memories of that. And I think with WashU, like right next door, I'd like to see more college students. And I don't know what they need. Probably finals week
Food.
care
They need a free cup of
packages.
coffee down on the corner.
I mean, that's an idea. That's is on my mind because my daughter is going to be 13. So I feel like these years coming up, they're going to be very important to keeping her in the faith, as well, and ministering to people because it feels like a lot of churches, they maybe have something for the little kids, but they don't have something that transitions you into adulthood in that way. But like you said, just being open to the students, snacks. I don't know if I know that there are some faculty that attend from different universities around. So I don't know if that could be a way of saying like you could use the space for a study group. We will have coffee. We will have sandwiches or
You know what I'm
something.
thinking? The Lutherans say to know God, you have to have a Bible in one hand and a beer in the other. Methodists, you need a Bible in one hand and a casserole in the other.
Well, like I went to grad school at WashU, and you would have a seminar or a journal club at lunch, and you're poor, you're living off a stipend, you wear your cargo pants, and you're stuffing sandwiches.
Oh
into
my
your
goodness, you
pockets.
stick the bagels in.
I've got a soda here, and I'm holding my trousers up, walking out. I mean, if you had something with Wi-Fi, coffee, air conditioning, and you were open to, a student group meeting or something like that, or a group of grad students studying for a final, that might be welcomed, especially because it's walking distance. They don't have to, go anywhere, and, they don't have to, Caldi's is lovely, but you have to buy something to go there. Yeah, it's expensive, and I didn't have an $8 coffee budget at that time. It was
I don't
a
have
long
it now. We
time.
have kids, right?
Yeah, I had to finish postdoc and everything before I had my $8 coffee budget in place.
So I think this is I'm seeing a great way to kind of wrap up all of this, because for me, the message I'm hearing over and over is from the very beginning of this merger to where we are now, the question has never been about survival. It's never been about how do we make sure we get more people coming, or how do we, keep our budget in the black. Those have never been the questions that led to the merger. And therefore, these are not the questions we're asking now. And that's what I think is making, in my mind, this be such a beautiful, and I will say successful thing, because I think we're redefining the idea of what is a successful church, right? And so as we can start to ask these questions about looking forward and what does it mean, to say it's never going to be about, well, how are they going to contribute to ministry? College students are, what are we going to get out of them? That's not the focus. That's not the question. And because that has always been, I think, the foundation from way back when these conversations began years ago at Legacy University to kind of where we're going now, that's the foundation, is just how do we be faithful with what we have, where we are? Can we do it better together? And then from there, we define what is successful. And for me, I think knowing that families, that spouses, that there's a place where they are welcomed, they are loved, they are safe, that you can explore and ask questions. I think there is a place where you can build these relationships. I mean, where else do my kids have the opportunity to say, well, that's, kind of like my second grandma, and that's like my third grandma, and, these are my aunts and uncles. Like, to create that space now is such a unique gift. And so with that, we're going to wrap up this episode, because I could talk with these people all day long. But just to say, wherever you are in your ministry, wherever kind of conversations your church is having, we hope that this story gives you hope, that ask the right questions, have the right people around you who keep saying, yes, but what comes next? What if, right? Listening to people who are saying, you know what, this is what's important to me. And then let the Spirit do the rest, and all will be well. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, as they say. So with that, we pray your blessing upon you, and thanks for tuning in for this season.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.